the Snow Knight's herb. I clutched the frayed edges of my wool cloak, the snow crunching underfoot. The cold sliced across my face like a blade. In the winter night of 1278, the Cast border forest was silent as a tomb. Only the sporadic prayers from the distant village drifted on the wind, a low murmur to God, or perhaps a curse aimed at me. My name is Alyssa, the village healer, burdened by a secret known to no one else, the forbidden knowledge of herbs that could earn me the title of witch and a place upon the church's pyre. Tonight, I was gathering moon petal. This rare herb blossoms only in the snow beneath a full moon, emitting a faint, ethereal glow. Legend says it can staunch the deepest of wounds. My basket was half full, but the biting wind had numbed my fingers to near uselessness. Suddenly, a low groan shattered the silence. I froze, tightening my grip on the small gathering knife, my eyes scanning the source of the sound. Beneath a twisted, ancient pine, a figure lay curled in the snow, his armor stained crimson. As I drew near, the moonlight fell upon his face, sharp, aristocratic features, eyes clenched shut, and cold sweat crystallizing on his brow. The breastplate was ripped open, a ghastly wound bleeding freely into the snow. I recognized the eagle crest on his armor instantly. Duke Leonard of Cast, commander of the kingdom's most elite knight order. Rumor painted him as ruthless and cold, a man who never hesitated to wield his sword, commanding the respect even of the clergy. "Who are you?" His voice was a rasping command as his eyes snapped open, those gray-blue pupils piercing my soul like ice. I instinctively took a step back, hitting the trunk of the pine. He struggled to rise, but the pain forced a sharp gasp from his lips. "Don't move." I lowered my voice, kneeling quickly to tear away the remaining piece of his chest plate and examine the wound. A sword slash, deep to the bone and bleeding torrentially. Without treatment, he would not survive the night. "I can save you, but you must obey me." He frowned, his gaze analytical, like a predator sizing up its prey. "A village girl, skilled in medicine?" His tone dripped with suspicion, yet his hand fell limp, unable to grasp the sword hilt at his waist. I had no time for explanations. I swiftly took the moon petal from my basket, crushed it, and mixed it with snow, applying the strange paste directly to the gash. The herb's faint glow shimmered in the snow, like some form of forbidden magic. I felt his eyes, hawk-like, locked onto me, filled with both scrutiny and menace. "Tell no one." He suddenly seized my wrist, his grip so fierce I nearly cried out. His palm was burning hot, a stark contrast to the cold snow. "Or you will regret it." I gritted my teeth, staring back. His eyes held not just threat, but a desperate plea. I nodded, finishing the bandaging. The scent of the herb, mixed with blood, filled the frigid air. The bleeding finally slowed, and his breathing steadied, though his face remained ashen as the snow. "Why are you here?" I couldn't help but ask, my voice trembling in the wind. A duke, alone and wounded, in this remote snow forest? He gave no answer, only a cold command: "Leave. Before they arrive." They? My heart clenched, and the dark image of the church's black-robed inquisitors flashed in my mind. They were ghosts, everywhere, hunting heretics like me. I hastily gathered my basket and helped him stand. His weight nearly crushed me, the coldness of his armor against my arm feeling like the touch of death. We stumbled forward. Snowflakes dusted his dark hair, a shattered crown upon his head. Then, the sound of hoofbeats and the flickering glow of torches appeared in the distance. My heart stopped the church's pursuit. "Go!" he snarled, shoving me away. He braced himself against the tree, drawing the long sword from his hip. Blood welled from his reopened wound, staining the white ground, yet he stood like an immovable mountain. "Run, and don't look back." I hesitated, my feet rooted to the spot. His figure blurred in the moonlight, his blade reflecting a cold gleam, his final bastion. I wanted to drag him with me, but he waved me off, his voice firm: "Don't let my blood be spilled for nothing, woman." Biting my lip, I turned and plunged into the forest. The snow blurred my vision, and my heart felt ripped in two. Behind me, the jarring clash of steel rang out, punctuated by his low battle cries. I did not know if he would live, or why I cared so deeply for the fate of a stranger. Reaching the edge of the village, I hid behind a woodpile, gasping for breath. The torchlight flickered in the distance. The inquisitors whispered, their searching footsteps growing closer. I gripped my knife, my palms slick with cold sweat. Suddenly, a piece of paper slid through the gaps in the woodpile. The note contained a single, hastily scribbled line: "Don't return to the village. Leave tonight." I looked up sharply, but the area was empty. The handwriting seemed familiar. How could he know my plight? My fingers trembled, holding the paper, and his gray-blue eyes flashed in my memory. In that moment, I knew I had stepped into a storm from which there would be no retreat. Interactive question: should Alyssa trust Leonard's warning and abandon the village entirely? If you were in her place, would you choose to trust a high-born duke you just met, or rely only on your own instincts? Oath under chains. The dungeon beneath the cast royal city reeked of dampness and mold, the chill of the iron chains penetrating my bones. I, Alyssa, a healer branded a witch by the Holy Church, was now chained to a stone wall, the rough ropes chafing my wrists. The candlelight cast distorted shadows on the wall, mocking my fate. 2 days ago, I saved that man Duke Leonard in the snow. His gray-blue eyes and commanding whispers were still etched in my mind. Yet now, I was trapped in this darkness, awaiting trial tomorrow. Had he already forgotten me? The dungeon's iron door groaned open, a screech as jarring as the voice of death. Inquisitor Carlos stepped in, his black robes trailing on the stone floor like a shadow consuming the light. His face was sharp as a blade, and his eyes burned with fanatical piety. "Alyssa," his voice was cold as winter frost, "you used forbidden herbs to heal, profaning God's will. Confess now. The fire will save your soul." I bit my tongue and looked up, meeting his gaze. What sin is there in saving a life? My voice trembled, yet held my last shred of defiance. Carlos sneered, the parchment in his hand filled with my charge's moon petal, night walking, heretic rituals. He advanced, the candlelight illuminating the cruelty in the corners of his mouth. "Tomorrow, the tribunal will make you understand that God's will cannot be defied." After he left, the dungeon fell into silence, broken only by the low, strained prayers drifting from the distance, like a premature funeral rite. I closed my eyes, recalling Leonard in the snow, his bloodied armor, his blade reflecting the moonlight. His command, "Tell no one," was carved onto my soul. He was a duke, high and mighty. I was a mere village woman. Why would he warn me? And why, in his eyes, was there a flicker of tenderness that should not belong to him? Suddenly, the iron door opened again, accompanied by light, hurried footsteps. I opened my eyes. In the dim light, a tall figure approached Leonard. His black cloak was damp, as if he'd just forced his way through the snowstorm, and his armor still bore traces of dried blood. His face was hidden in the shadow of his hood, but those gray-blue eyes, like the brightest stars in the night sky, pierced my soul. "You shouldn't have come," I whispered, my heart rate accelerating uncontrollably. His presence here, given his rank, put him in greater danger than me. Silence. His voice was deep, carrying the authority of command. He crouched down, examining the ropes binding my wrists, his brow furrowed. The chains clinked. His fingers brushed my skin, the heat of his touch making me flinch. For a moment, the dungeon's chill seemed to vanish, the candlelight dancing in his eyes like an unquenchable flame. "Why did you save me?" I couldn't help but ask, my voice almost drowned out by my own pounding heart. "You know I am a witch?" He cut me off, his tone hard, yet with a subtle tremor. "I do not care what you are. I only know that you saved my life." He drew a dagger from his belt and sliced through the ropes, the action swift as wind. My wrists were released, a rush of painful numbness returning, but he seized my hand, his grip too strong to break. "Listen, Alyssa," he said in a low voice, my name a forbidden chant on his lips. "I will stall the trial tomorrow. But you must keep silent. Do not admit to any crime. His eyes were like swords, piercing my defenses. Speak of our encounter, and we both die. Why are you helping me? I stared at him, desperately searching for an answer on his cold, handsome face. His silence made me uneasy. The candlelight flickered, and the dungeon walls seemed to press in on us. Because I owe you, he finally said, his voice dropping to a whisper. But make no mistake. This is not salvation. This is a transaction. A transaction? My heart jolted. His hand left mine, leaving an empty, cold space. I wanted to ask more, but the sound of approaching guards reached us from the distance. He rose quickly, his cloak sweeping around him to obscure the candlelight. Remember, silence. He threw the word at me and vanished into the darkness as if he had never been there. I leaned against the stone wall, the lingering warmth of his hand still on my palm. The dungeon's cold returned, sinking into my bones. I knew that tomorrow's tribunal would be a far greater storm. Carlos's fanaticism, Leonard's secret, and the woman yet unseen Isabella, Leonard's fiancée. Village rumors claimed she was as beautiful as a saint but possessed a snake's heart. Had she sensed the connection between Leonard and me? The guards' torches drew near. I hastily put the ropes back over my wrists, pretending to still be bound. The candle flame wavered, as if God was watching me or destiny was mocking me. Leonard's words echoed, "Speak of our encounter, and we both die." But he didn't know I was already prepared to die for my own beliefs. Now, however, an unexpected flicker of emotion had taken root in my heart. Suddenly, a low whisper came from outside the cell, a woman's voice, sharp and cruel, "She's here." And the Duke himself came to see her. My heart plummeted. Isabella? How did she know? Her footsteps faded, but the jealousy in her tone coiled around my heart like a viper. Tomorrow, will the tribunal's fire consume everything, or will it ignite an even fiercer storm? Interactive question: should Alyssa remain silent during the trial, trusting in Leonard's promise? If you were facing a choice between death and trusting a powerful duke you barely know, what would you choose? The tribunal's flame. The Cast Royal City Tribunal Hall was a cold behemoth, consuming all who dared to defy the will of the divine. I stood on the raised platform, my hands shackled, surrounded by the severe pikes of the church guards. The firelight of the torches danced on the stone walls, reflecting the distorted faces of the crowd. They roared, "Burn the witch," the sound surging like a tide that threatened to drown my heart. Inquisitor Carlos stood on high, his black robes spread like the wings of death. His voice was sharp as a knife, cutting through the din. "Alyssa, humble healer, you have profaned God with forbidden herbs. The evidence is irrefutable. Confess, or let the flame cleanse your soul." I gritted my teeth, my throat dry as dust. Leonard's words echoed, "Silence, and you may live." I lifted my head, searching through the masses for those gray-blue eyes. The great iron doors of the hall burst open with a crash, and a gust of cold wind swept in. Leonard strode in, clad in black and gold armor, the eagle crest gleaming in the firelight. His steps were as steady as a mountain, shaking the very floor with each stride. "Carlos." His voice was low but authoritative, commanding the entire room. "Is this trial not unduly rushed? Where is the evidence? Where is the will of the divine?" Carlos sneered. "Duke, this witch's crimes are beyond dispute. The glow of the moon petal, the nocturnal wanderings, these are the markings of the devil." "Moon petal?" Leonard's voice was laced with scorn. "It is merely a healer's herb. How does it become evidence of the devil? If the church is so careless, what becomes of Cast's justice?" His words were a beam of light piercing the darkness that enveloped me. Our eyes met, and for a fleeting instant, his expression softened, but he quickly turned away, his face hardening, as if that moment of tenderness was merely my illusion. Carlos flushed with anger. "She used forbidden spells to save lives, Duke. Why do you protect a heretic?" From the noble seating, a woman's voice suddenly rang out, sharp and cold. "Perhaps the Duke has an indiscreet arrangement with this witch." Isabella, Leonard's fiancée, stood there, her eyes venomous as a snake. I merely wonder why the Duke visited the dungeon late at night, whispering with this witch. Leonard's fingers tightened on his sword hilt, but his voice remained calm. Isabella, choose your words carefully. To slander a duke is treason. He turned to Carlos. If this trial lacks concrete evidence, I demand a delay. Caste's law is not for the church to trample arbitrarily. Carlos narrowed his eyes. Finally, he gestured. Very well, Duke. You have 3 days to produce your supposed evidence. But without new proof, this witch will surely face God's judgment. Guards roughly grabbed my chains and dragged me from the platform. Just as I was being hauled toward a side door, Leonard's hands suddenly grabbed my arm. His fingers briefly pressed my wrist, and he murmured, "Hold fast." 3 days. The guards pushed him away, dragging me into the corridor. A female guard approached, handing me a piece of rough cloth wrapped around a small knife. Her voice was barely audible, the Duke's command. Keep it hidden. Leonard, what was he planning? In the distance, the clamor of the tribunal continued, Carlos's loud declaration sounding like a death knell. In 3 days, the witch will face God's flame. I gripped the knife, the cold steel sharpening my mind. Interactive question. Should Alyssa use the knife Leonard gave her to attempt an escape, or should she continue to trust that he can overturn the situation within 3 days? If you were facing imminent burning and the uncertainty of a powerful duke's motives, would you choose to run or wait? Blood-stained sword. The snow forest outside Cast was as silent as a graveyard, only the sharp sound of hoofbeats and clashing metal tearing the darkness. I, Alyssa, was curled up in a prisoner cart, my hands shackled. 3 days ago, Leonard bought me time at the tribunal, but now I was being transported to a secret church stronghold. Suddenly, the cart jolted violently and stopped. Horses whinnied. The shouts of the guards mingled with the sharp clang of swords. I pressed against the wall, peering through a crack at the chaos outside. Leonard's own sworn order was attacking. Release her. His voice thundered, cutting through the night with undeniable authority. I saw him Leonard astride his warhorse, his long sword already stained with blood. The cart's lock was severed, and he hauled me out, his palms scalding hot against the icy chain. Don't speak, follow me. His tone was urgent and commanding, but it could not mask a slight tremble. We plunged into the forest. His armor was streaked with blood, and a fresh wound beneath his chest plate was seeping. Stop. I gasped, pulling my arm free and kneeling down to tear a strip from my ruined dress. You'll die, Leonard. He grabbed my wrist. Don't waste time. I finished the bandaging. The bitter scent of herbs mixed with the metallic smell of blood, filling the snowy air. When I finished, I looked up, meeting his eyes directly. Why are you doing this? I whispered. You are a duke. Saving me is treason. He remained silent for a beat, before finally murmuring, because I owe you a life. But don't misunderstand, Alyssa. This is not salvation. This is a curse. The church's reinforcements arrived. Martin, Leonard's deputy, rode up. My lord, the king has issued a warrant for your arrest. We must go. Leonard looked at me, then seemed to reach a decisive conclusion. Take her to the chapel, he commanded Martin, then turned to me. Hide there. Trust no one. The chapel? I was bewildered. The abandoned Covenant chapel. He pushed me onto a horse. We galloped toward the Covenant chapel, the wind howling. He pulled me inside the ruins. A sliver of moonlight illuminated his blood-stained armor. Wait for me here, he commanded. No matter what happens, do not leave. Leonard, I grasped his cloak, my voice trembling. Will you come back? He paused, his back to me. After a long moment, he whispered, my heart is already treasonous, Alyssa. Only for you. He pushed the door open and stepped out. I leaned against the stone wall, the warmth of his blood still on my palm. Suddenly, Hoofbeats echoed in the distance, mingled with a woman's sharp, cold laughter. Isabella. Her voice carried on the wind and snow. Leonard, do you truly think you can escape the king's eye? I clutched the small knife Leonard had given me. I knew this escape had just begun. Interactive question: should Alyssa trust Leonard's vow and wait for him in the chapel? If you were facing the church's pursuit and Leonard's act of treason, would you choose to follow his destiny or attempt to escape alone? These chapters weave a tale of forbidden love, dark magic, and high-stakes political intrigue, reminiscent of classic fantasy and Gothic romance. Here is the English translation, formatted for better readability and to resonate with a Western audience's preferences for narrative flow and dialogue. The Price of Forbidden Magic. April night, 1279. The forest-bordering cast became a colossal black curtain, swallowing the moonlight, leaving only the sound of snowflakes whispering in the wind. I, Elara, huddled beneath an ancient oak, my hands stained with earth and the juice of herbs. The air was thick with the bitter scent of medicine, mixed with the metallic tang of blood. Beside me, Leonard leaned against the trunk, his armor torn, the wound on his chest split open again, blood seeping out to darken his cloak. His breathing was heavy, and his gray-blue eyes, dim in the candlelight, resembled a lake before a storm. We had been in this forest for 3 days. Our flight from the brief sanctuary of the Holy Covenant Church to our current desperate escape was relentlessly shadowed by the Church's hounds. Leonard, in saving me, had openly defied the Holy See, staining himself with the crime of treason. His knightly order was scattered, with only his loyal lieutenant, Martin, still by his side. Yet even Martin had warned him, this road leads only to death. Don't waste any more time, Leonard growled, trying to rise, his grip on his sword hilt white-knuckled. His voice still carried the authority of a commander, but it was fragile, like a candle flame in the wind. I pressed down on his shoulder. The force was minimal, but it made him wince and pause. You'll die. I bit out, my voice trembling in the cold wind. I pulled Moonpetal and a forbidden blood rose from my tattered pouch, a herb rumored to revive the near-dead, yet branded by the Church as a mark of the devil. I knew using it was an admission of being a witch, but without it, he would surely not survive the night. His gaze locked onto my hand, his eyes sharp as daggers. What are you doing? Saving you, I whispered, crushing the blood rose. Its crimson juice dripped onto the snow, like tears of blood. I began to chant the forbidden spell, an ancient incantation passed down from my mother. Every syllable was a blade, severing my own faith. The forest seemed to answer my voice. The wind ceased, the shadows of the trees twisted, and a strange, warm current permeated the air. You are a witch. His tone was not a question, but a statement, laced with a complexity I couldn't decipher. He seized my wrist, his grip so fierce I almost dropped the herbs. His touch was scalding, like a brand burning into my skin. Stop, Elara. This will destroy you. Destroy me? I looked up, tears blurring my vision. If you die, what is left for me to destroy? My voice cracked, carrying an emotion I dared not admit, even to myself. In that moment, the candlelight flickered, revealing the struggle in his eyes, a hairline fracture in a frozen lake exposing a deep-seated tenderness. He released my hand, silently watching me continue the spell. The juices of the blood rose and Moonpetal, applied to his wound, emitted a faint luminescence. As the final syllable of the incantation fell, the forest suddenly glowed with an eerie green light, like the sigh of the earth. His wound miraculously sealed, the bleeding stopped, but his face remained ashen as snow. What did you do? He asked in a low voice, a flicker of fear in his tone, as if seeing the true me for the first time. I gasped, cold sweat beading on my brow. The price of the forbidden magic was already spreading through me. My fingers were numb, my heartbeat erratic, as if throttled by an invisible chain. I bit my lip until I tasted blood and whispered, I am merely a physician, skilled with herbs. Don't lie. He roughly gripped my shoulders, forcing me to meet his gaze. You used a forbidden spell, Elara. You know the price. I pushed him away, rising to stand with my back to the candle, trying to hide my weakness. The price is mine to bear, not yours. My voice was cold and hard, but I couldn't conceal the tremor in my heart. I didn't want him to know the Blood Rose's spell would consume the caster's life force, even a fraction of it, enough to guarantee my eventual collapse. He stood, his steps unsteady, but he forcefully turned me to face him. His fingers lifted my chin, compelling me to look at him. "You're mad." His voice was low, filled with anger and something deeper. "For me, you shouldn't take such a risk." "For you?" I scoffed, though the tears betrayed me, streaming down my face. "I simply don't want to owe you anything." But my heart screamed the truth. "Admit it, Elara, you long ago betrayed the gods for him." In the candlelight, his face was inches from mine, his breath hot, smelling of blood and iron. His hands slid to the side of my face, his fingertips tracing my tear stains, a touch as light as a feather, yet as heavy as fate. "If loving you is a sin," he whispered, his voice a sword thrust into my soul, "I will gladly fall into hell forever." In that moment, the forest fell silent, the snowflakes suspended in mid-air, as if time itself had paused for us. His lips were almost touching my forehead, the mix of warmth and cold stole my breath. Just as I thought he would kiss me, the sound of hoofbeats came from the distance, and the light of torches pierced the night. "The church." Martin's voice cut through the trees, urgent and low. "My lord, they are upon us." Leonard violently let go of me, drawing his sword, his armor glinting in the candlelight. He shoved me behind the oak, roaring, "Hide!" I clutched my small knife, hiding behind the tree, my heart pounding like a drum. The torches drew nearer, and the figure of Cardinal Carlos appeared in the clearing, his black robes like a specter in the snow. His voice was sharp as a knife. "Leonard, do you think you can escape the eyes of God?" Leonard stepped forward, his blade reflecting the torchlight, the blood not yet dry. "Carlos, your judgment is merely a game of power." His tone was cold and severe, carrying the authority of a duke. "Release her, or this forest will be dyed with blood." Carlos sneered, waving his guards to surround him. Hiding behind the tree, the weakness from the forbidden magic made it hard to stand. I knew Leonard was buying me time, but his wounds were not fully healed, his order was scattered. What chance did we have? Suddenly, Martin rushed to my side, handing me a parchment, whispering, "The Duke asked me to give you this. There's a greater conspiracy within the church, Elara. You must survive." Stunned, I unfolded the note. It contained only one line: "Trust me, even if the world betrays you." My fingers trembled, and a tear fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. In the distance, sword light and torch light clashed, Leonard's figure, a lone wolf, facing the church's legion. How long can he last? And can I endure the price of the forbidden spell long enough to uncover the truth? Should Elara confess the price of the forbidden spell and ask Leonard for more protection? If it were you, facing the life-threatening cost of the spell and the church's pursuit, would you choose to continue hiding the truth, or entrust it to a duke branded as a traitor? The shadow of betrayal. Spring. A secluded estate on the cast border was shrouded in the shadow of a thunderstorm, the thunder like the roar of an enraged god, rattling the window panes. I, Elara, stood in the dilapidated second-floor room, clutching the small knife Leonard had given me, its blade cold in the candlelight. The rain outside was a torrent, blurring my vision, yet failing to hide the chill in my heart. Since our escape from the snowy forest, we had taken refuge in this ally's estate, seeking a moment's reprieve, but the church's pursuers were like ubiquitous ghosts. Leonard stood by the door, his armor shed, wearing only a blood-stained linen shirt. Though the spell had healed his wound, it still made his movements stiff. His gray-blue eyes swept over me, a commanding severity in his look. "Stay away from the window, Elara." His voice was low, like thunder before the storm, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. "Do you think we can escape them by hiding here?" I couldn't help but retort, my tone laced with fatigue and anxiety. The estate's owner, Baron Balin, Leonard's old friend, had sworn to shelter us, but every stone of this place radiated unease, as if whispering prophecies of treachery. He didn't answer. He walked to my side, the candlelight revealing the weariness and hidden worry on his face. His fingers brushed against my arm, a warmth like fire, fleeting as a phantom. "I told you, trust me." His tone allowed no argument, but a hint of tenderness flashed in his eyes, like the candle flame from our first meeting in the snow. I bit my lip, the taste of blood spreading in my mouth. Trust him? The Duke who committed treason for me, the man who cleared a path with sword and blood, yet never told me his full plan? I wanted to ask more, but footsteps outside the door interrupted me. Martin, Leonard's lieutenant, pushed the door open, his face as white as paper. "My lord, the Church's legion is here. Baron Balin, he betrayed us." My heart sank instantly. Leonard's eyes went icy cold, the veins in his hand gripping the sword hilt bulging. "Balin?" His voice was low as a razor blade. "He will regret this." Before he could say more, the shouts of the Church's soldiers and the clatter of hoofbeats came from outside the estate. Through the rain, the black-robed guards surged like a tide. I rushed to the window and saw a familiar figure, Isabella, Leonard's fiancée, riding a white horse. Her mink cloak was soaked, but her eyes burned with a viper's venomous jealousy. She shouted, "Leonard, did you think you could hide from me? Your witch will die tonight." Her voice was a dagger, stabbing my chest. I turned to Leonard. His face was pale with fury, but he showed no surprise, only a deep-seated anger. "She tracked us," he muttered, as if to himself. "I underestimated her." "You knew she would come?" I advanced on him, my voice trembling with an anger I hadn't realized I possessed. "Why didn't you tell me? Leonard, what are you hiding?" He violently grabbed my shoulders, the force almost choking me. "You want the truth?" His voice was deep, laced with suppressed pain. "I saved you, not because I owe you, but because I can't bear to watch you die." His words were like thunder, stopping my heart. His fingers tightened on my shoulders, the candlelight dancing in his eyes like a raging fire. I froze, tears welling up in my eyes. "Then why won't you tell me?" I roared, pushing him away, my chest feeling as if it were being torn open. "You let me act like a fool, believing your every word, yet you won't even let me see your heart." He was silent, his gaze sharp as a knife, but carrying a vulnerability I had never seen before. Just as I thought he would speak, Martin burst into the room, his voice urgent. "My lord, the Church has broken down the door. We must go." Leonard pulled me up, rushing towards the back door. The estate hallway was dim, candles flickering, the holy statues on the walls seemingly sneering. Rain seeped in through the broken windows, mixing with the scent of blood, making my stomach churn. Suddenly, a figure blocked our way. Martin. He stood with his head bowed, clutching a parchment, his voice barely audible. "My lord, I have sinned." Leonard stopped, his sword half drawn. "Martin, explain." His tone was cold as ice, bearing the full weight of a duke's authority. Martin looked up, his eyes full of guilt. "The Church, I revealed your location." His voice trembled, squeezed from his throat. "They captured my sister. I had no choice." My heart plummeted. Leonard's sword instantly pressed against Martin's throat. A bead of blood seeped out, dripping onto the stone floor. "You betrayed me." His voice was low, carrying the wrath of ruin. "To save her, you would condemn me and Alara to death?" Martin fell to his knees, tears mixing with the rain. "My lord, kill me, but I beg you, save her." I grabbed Leonard's arm, trying to stop him. "No." My voice was hoarse. "He did it for his family, Leonard, you can't." He shook me off, his blade not moving an inch. "Trust is my boundary, Alara." His gaze shifted to me, carrying a chilling ruthlessness that made my heart jump. "The same goes for you. Don't disappoint me." The shouts of the Church were getting closer, the light of torches advancing from the end of the corridor. Leonard retracted his sword, pulled me along, and roared, "Go." He shoved open the back door. The rain was like knives, stinging my eyes. We plunged into the storm. Martin followed behind, a pardoned sinner. Outside the estate, the church guards had formed a semicircle. Carlos stood in the rain, his black robe soaked, his eyes burning with fanatic zeal. "Leonard, you cannot escape." His voice cut through the thunder. "Hand over the witch, and I will spare your life." Leonard shielded me with his body, his blade flashing in the rain. "Carlos, your judgment ends here." His tone was stark, like a death sentence. "Tonight, there will be a river of blood." I clutched my small knife, the rain mixing with my tears. Martin's betrayal, Isabella's jealousy, Carlos's fanaticism, they were all a net, trapping us. Leonard's arm brushed mine, warm as fire, yet chilled with blood. I knew this breakout would be our final struggle, but was his heart truly, as he claimed, in treason for me? Suddenly, Isabella's voice cut through the rain, sharp and triumphant. "Leonard, your heart may be hers, but your life is mine." Her figure vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a hint of a greater conspiracy. Should Alara forgive Martin's betrayal and continue fighting alongside him? If it were you, facing the intersection of loyalty and betrayal, would you choose to trust a repentant traitor, or push him towards the church's judgment? The Blood Oath of the Sanctuary. Summer, 1279. The sanctuary in the royal city of Cast loomed like a silent, enormous beast. Low murmurs of prayer echoed between the stone columns, like the sighs of the divine. I, Alara, stepped into this sacred yet frigid hall, tightly gripping Leonard's hand. Candlelight flickered between the tall stained glass windows, reflecting the cold gaze of the holy statues, as if judging our sin. The air was a mix of incense and blood. My linen dress was smeared with mud and gore, the hem torn, much like my shattered faith. 3 days had passed since our breakout from Baron Balin's estate. The church's hunters had shadowed our every move, and Isabella's betrayal had irrevocably branded Leonard as a traitor. He stood beside me, his armor broken, his scabbard empty, save for the small knife gleaming at his waist. His gray-blue eyes swept over the sanctuary with a duke's authority, though they could not hide his exhaustion and resolve. "Don't stop," he ordered in a low, iron voice, urging me towards the depths of the sanctuary. We had only one purpose here, to expose the church's conspiracy. The parchment Martin had slipped me before the breakout documented the truth behind Carlos's witch trials. He was not working for God, but for power, hoarding forbidden spellbooks and using the name of the witch hunt to seize control of Cast's royalty. This sanctuary was our final battlefield and our only hope. "Leonard," I whispered, my fingers unconsciously digging into his arm, "if we fail." "We won tea," he cut me off, his voice deep as thunder. "If God demands your death, I will defy God." His words sliced into my heart, stealing my breath. His fingers briefly covered mine, warm as fire, warding off the chill of the sanctuary. In that moment, I almost forgot our desperation, wanting only to drown in this forbidden contact. The heavy iron door of the sanctuary crashed open, and Cardinal Carlos strode in, his black robes like night, followed by the church guards. The light of their torches cast menacing shadows across his face. "Leonard." His voice was sharp, cutting through the prayers. "You dare to desecrate the sanctuary, bringing a witch with you." Leonard drew his knife, stepping in front of me, the blade reflecting the candlelight like a streak of blood. "Carlos, your judgment is nothing but a lie," he declared loudly, silencing the entire hall. "You hoard forbidden spellbooks, manipulate the witch trials, and seek to usurp the crown." The nobles gasped, and the prayers ceased instantly. Carlos's face twisted, a glint of cunning in his eyes. "Insolent traitor." He waved his hand, and the guards closed in, the tips of their spears shining in the candlelight. "Your accusations are baseless, Leonard. Tonight, you and the witch will die together." I pulled the parchment from my dress, holding it high, my voice trembling yet firm. "This is the evidence. Carlos, you have used forbidden magic to frame the innocent and desecrate the divine." My words rang out like thunder. The nobles murmured, and the guards hesitated. Carlos's eyes were cold and venomous, like a snake driven into a corner. Suddenly, a figure burst from a side door, a mink cloak radiant as blood in the candlelight Isabella. Her blonde hair was disheveled, and she lunged towards me, a dagger gripped in her hand. "You don't deserve to stand by him," she shrieked, the dagger flashing towards my chest, fast as the wind. "Ilara!" Leonard roared, shoving me aside, meeting Isabella's dagger himself. The blade sliced into his arm, blood spraying, dropping onto the sanctuary's stone floor like an offering upon an altar. I screamed and rushed to him, tearing a strip from my skirt to press against the wound. Blood seeped through my fingers, warm and pungent. "Why?" I choked, tears dripping onto his armor. "You shouldn't have." "Because I cannot lose you." His voice was hoarse, carrying a vulnerability I had never heard. He seized my hand, the blood staining our fingers, a kind of forbidden oath. The candlelight flickered in his eyes, like a burning soul. Isabella, restrained by the guards, still struggled, her eyes filled with maniacal jealousy. "Leonard, you betrayed me, betrayed Caste, for her." Her voice was sharp, ringing painfully in my ears. Carlos seized the chaos to step forward, holding a black leather book, its cover etched with sinister runes, the forbidden spellbook. He sneered, "You think you can expose me? The sanctuary is my domain." He raised the book and chanted a spell. The air chilled instantly, the candles threatened to extinguish, and eerie shadows manifested on the stone walls. "He is summoning forbidden magic." I cried out, pushing Leonard aside and rushing towards Carlos. I didn't know where the courage came from. Perhaps the cost of the forbidden spell had already stripped me of fear. I lunged at him, trying to snatch the book, but his hand was like iron, grasping my throat. A coldness seeped from his fingers, trying to freeze my soul. "Stop!" Leonard roared, his knife slashing through the air, striking at Carlos. The chanting broke off, and Carlos staggered back, the spellbook dropping to the ground with a dull thud. Guards swarmed us, surrounding us completely. Leonard shielded me, his knife dripping blood, his breath heavy. "Carlos, your plot ends here," he gasped, his voice still commanding. "Nobles, see his true face. He is not God's messenger, but a thief of power." The nobles stirred. Someone shouted, "Seize the Inquisitor." Carlos's face was ashen, and he tried to flee towards the side door but was blocked by the guards. Despair flashed in his eyes, like a cornered beast. But the hope of victory was fleeting. Church reinforcements poured in from the main door, black-robed guards swelling like a tide, turning the sanctuary into a cage. Carlos laughed wildly, "What if you exposed me? Tonight, you will both be buried here." Leonard pulled me up, rushing towards a secret door behind the altar. The wind extinguished the candles, and darkness consumed everything. His hand gripped mine, blood and sweat mixed, our only connection. "Don't let go," he whispered, his voice echoing in the darkness like a final vow. The secret door led to a narrow tunnel. The air was cold as a knife, and the smell of blood emanated from Leonard's wound. My legs were too weak to stand. The frailty from the forbidden spell washed over me like a tide, but I bit down and matched his pace. Behind us, the sound of the guards' footsteps was a death knell, drawing nearer. At the end of the tunnel was an iron door. Leonard kicked it open, revealing the snow-covered mountainside in the storm. He turned to me, a look of fierce resolve in his eyes. "If we don't make it through tonight, Ilara, who do you trust, me or the God in your heart?" I froze, tears mixing with the rain. His blood stained my hand, like our shared curse. I wanted to answer, but I heard Carlos's laughter behind us, close and ghostly. "You have nowhere to run." Should Ilara have risked seizing the forbidden spellbook in the sanctuary, further exposing her own courage? If it were you, facing Carlos's forbidden magic and Leonard's protection, would you choose to fight fiercely, or trust his plan to escape? Confession in the Snow. Summer, 1279. The snow fortress on the border of Caste was devoured by a blizzard. The cold wind was like a knife, stinging my face. Ilara, wrapped tightly in the tattered cloak Leonard had given me, stumbled along behind him. The snow beneath our feet was deep, every step like walking into an abyss. The bloody battle in the sanctuary was a nightmare. Carlos's mad laughter, Isabella's dagger, and the shadow of the spellbook still echoed in my mind. Leonard's left arm was still seeping blood. His wound, roughly bandaged, left a trail of dark red footprints in the snow, like the mark of fate. The fortress was a derelict stone castle. Its shattered walls could not keep out the storm. The candle flame on the sconce flickered, casting our distorted shadows. Leonard pushed me into a small room, closing the wooden door. The cold seeped through the cracks, making my teeth chatter. He leaned against the wall, his breathing heavy, his gray-blue eyes weary but resolute in the candlelight. "Don't move," his voice was low and commanding. "The church's pursuit will arrive soon." I knelt down to check his wound. The blood had soaked through the rags, thick and warm, smelling of iron. I tore a strip from my dress, trying to re-bandage it, but my fingers were so numb they were useless. "You can't bleed anymore," I whispered, a panic in my tone that I dared not admit. "Leonard, you must survive." He grabbed my wrist, making me flinch. His fingers were scalding, like fire, burning into my skin. "Elara, stop." His voice was hoarse, carrying a rare vulnerability. "You've saved me too many times. I'm not worth it." "Not worth it?" I looked up sharply, tears blurring my vision. "You committed treason for me, took a knife from me, and you say you're not worth it?" My voice trembled, laced with anger and heartache. The candlelight danced on his face, illuminating his sharp features, like a warrior god carved by the divine, yet carrying a mortal's exhaustion. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on my face, as if trying to etch me into his soul. Suddenly, he pulled me closer, cupping my face in his hands, his fingertips brushing my cheek, catching a cold tear. His breath was hot, mixed with the scent of blood and snow, so close that I forgot to breathe. "I never imagined I would betray everything for a woman," he whispered, his voice a sword thrust into my heart. "Elara, you are my curse, and my salvation." My heart stopped. The candle flickered against the storm's howl, like the last light kindled for us. I wanted to speak, but his gaze swallowed me. Those gray-blue eyes, like a storm-tossed lake, held a deep affection I dared not touch. "Leonard," I whispered his name, tears falling, warm as blood, onto his hands. He lowered his head, his forehead resting against mine, our breaths mingled, like the last defense between us. "If we don't survive tonight," his voice was a mere whisper, "I just want you to know that my heart is yours." In that moment, the wind and snow ceased, and the world paused. The candlelight cast our overlapping shadows, like a vow of destiny. I closed my eyes, feeling his warmth, forgetting the church's pursuit, forgetting the cost of the forbidden spell, wanting only to drown in this forbidden moment. His lips were almost touching mine, but a sharp knock on the door interrupted us. "My lord." Martin's voice came from outside the door, urgent and low. "The church's vanguard has arrived. We have to leave." Leonard abruptly released me, pulling out the knife at his waist, the blade shining in the candlelight. He pulled me up, shoving open the wooden door to reveal the endless curtain of snow. Martin stood before the door, his armor dusted with snow, his face stained with blood. "I'll draw them off." His voice was heavy, carrying a sense of ultimate resolve. "My lord, take her and live." "Martin!" I cried out, trying to stop him. "You can't." He turned, a flash of guilt and determination in his eyes. "Elara, I betrayed you once. This is my atonement." He drew his long sword and charged into the snow, meeting the distant torchlight. Leonard pulled me back, roaring, "Don't let his sacrifice be in vain." He dragged me out of the fortress. The snowflakes were like knives, slicing my vision. Behind us, the grating sound of clashing blades, Martin's roar swallowed by the wind and snow. My tears mixed with the flakes, freezing into icy beads. My heart was in agony. We stumbled toward the cliff edge. Leonard's wound had reopened, blood dripping onto the snow, like a string of shattered vows. I stopped, trying to bandage him, but he pushed me away. "No time." His voice was urgent, fiercely commanding. Ilara, survive. I gritted my teeth, tearing a corner of the cloak to press against his wound. His hand covered mine, blood and snow mingled, like our shared fate. You shouldn't do all this for me, I choked, my voice drowned by the storm. I'm just a physician. You are everything to me, he interrupted, his tone firm as iron. His fingers tightened on mine, as if afraid I would vanish at any moment. The residue of the candlelight warmth lingered in my palm, like his last promise. Suddenly, hoofbeats sounded near the cliff, the torchlight piercing the snow curtain. The church's pursuers had arrived. Carlos's figure was faintly visible in the storm, his black robes like the wings of the Grim Reaper. Leonard, you have nowhere to run. His voice was sharp, filled with fanatic triumph. Leonard pushed me behind a large boulder, gripping his knife, ready to fight. I grabbed his cloak, my voice trembling, "Don't go." He turned, a look of fierce resolve in his eyes. "If I die, you must live." His voice was low, like a final confession. "Ilara, remember me." My heart was torn, my vision blurred by tears. Just as he turned to face the enemy, my fingers felt a scroll in his cloak, Martin's final clue. It read, "Altar, forbidden spell reversible." My fingers trembled, the luminescence of the blood rose flashing through my mind. I knew the cost of the forbidden spell, but if it could save him, should I risk everything? In the wind and snow, Leonard's blade flashed like snow, blood splattering, staining the white ground red. And Carlos's laughter, like the death knell of fate, drew ever closer. Should Ilara risk using the forbidden spell to reverse Leonard's fate? If it were you, facing the choice of sacrificing yourself to save your loved one, would you choose to pay with your life, or look for another way to coexist? The Altar of Fate. Autumn, 1279. The ancient altar on the cliff's edge of the cast border stood defiant against the howling blizzard, which raged like the roar of the gods. I, Ilara, stood at the altar's center, my tattered linen dress torn by the wind, my hands gripping a scroll of parchment. It held the secret of the blood rose spell, a life for a life, to reverse death. Beside me, Leonard knelt, his armor shattered, the wound on his chest bleeding profusely, staining the altar's stone. His gray-blue eyes were dim, like a candle about to go out, yet they were fixed on me with commanding authority. "Ilara, go." I shook my head, tears mixing with snowflakes, freezing into icy beads. The bloody battle at the snow fortress was a nightmare. Martin's sacrifice had bought us a moment's respite, but it couldn't stop the church's legion. Carlos's black-robed guards now encircled the altar. The light of their torches flickered in the storm, like the entrance to hell. I knew this was our last battlefield, and Leonard's and my ultimate choice. "You can't die," I whispered, my voice swallowed by the wind and snow. I unrolled the parchment. The scrawled writing was Martin's final clue: forbidden spell reversible, the cost is the caster's life. My fingers trembled. The juice of the blood rose had long seeped into my palm, bringing an icy chill. Leonard struggled to rise, seizing my wrist, the force so great I nearly dropped the scroll. "Don't do anything foolish." His voice was hoarse, filled with anger and despair. "Your life is worth more than mine, Ilara." His hand was scalding hot. Blood oozed from his fingers, dripping onto my dress like a blooming red lotus. "Worth more?" I scoffed, tears blurring my vision. "You committed treason for me, took a knife for me, my life was bought with forbidden magic." My voice shook, a mix of heartache and fierce resolve. The altar stone was cold, etched with ancient runes that glowed with an eerie luminescence in the candlelight. I knelt, crushing the remaining blood rose. Its juice, mixed with snowmelt, smeared onto the runes. "Stop!" Leonard roared, trying to snatch the parchment, but his injury made him stumble. His blood stained the altar, an offering to the forbidden spell. I pushed him away, chanting the spell in a low voice, every syllable a blade, severing my soul. The air suddenly chilled, the snow ceased, and the runes around the altar lit up with a green light, like the sigh of the earth. "You're insane!" he yelled, crawling towards me, cupping my face in his hands, forcing me to meet his gaze. His eyes were like a lake before a storm, holding a deep affection I dared not touch. I'd rather die than have you sacrifice yourself. It's too late, I whispered, tears dripping onto his hands, warm as blood. As the final syllable of the spell was uttered, the altar shook. Green light surged like a tide, enveloping Leonard. His wound miraculously healed, the bleeding stopped, but his face remained ashen as snow. He froze, his eyes flashing with fear and fury. What have you done? I gasped, the cost of the forbidden spell rushing over me. My heartbeat was erratic, my fingers numb, as if seized by an invisible chain. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, struggling to stand. I saved you, just as you saved me, my voice was weak, but held my final defiance. Now, we are even. He violently pulled me into his arms, the force almost suffocating me. His breath was hot, mixed with the scent of blood and iron, like the last fortress. You shouldn't have his voice cracked, a rare vulnerability that tore at my heart. Elara, I cannot lose you. I leaned against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. The faint warmth of the candle flickered on the altar, the last light we had. Just then, the sound of hoofbeats thundered outside the altar. The torchlight pierced the snow. Carlos's figure appeared at the cliff's edge, his black robes like the Grim Reaper's wings in the night. Leonard. His voice was sharp, filled with fanatic triumph. Your witch has dug her own grave with forbidden magic. Tonight, you will both fall. Leonard released me, pulling out the small knife at his waist, the blade shining in the candlelight. He shielded me, his blood-stained cloak flapping in the wind. Carlos, your end is here. His tone was cold and severe, like a death sentence. In the name of the Duke, I end your conspiracy. The guards rushed forward, their spears forming a thicket. The heat of the torches scorched my face. I clutched the parchment. The weakness from the forbidden spell made it hard to stand, but Leonard's back was a mountain, blocking everything. I knew he would fight for me until his last breath, but could my life last until that day? Suddenly, the altar shook more violently. The green light surged, and a low rumble echoed through the earth. The power of the forbidden spell was out of control. The stone cracked, and the storm rushed in, like the wrath of the gods. I grabbed Leonard's arm, shouting, "We have to go." He turned, a look of fierce resolve in his eyes. No, Elara. This is our battlefield. He raised his knife and charged the guards. Blood splattered, staining the snow red. His figure was a lone wolf, his blade flashing like snow, cutting through the darkness. I knelt on the altar, the green light of the forbidden spell consuming my vision. I knew this power would save him, and ruin me. But if it meant he would live, I was willing to pay any price. Carlos's laughter echoed in the storm, "Witch, your life is mine." My fingers tightened on the parchment, my blood dripping onto the runes, the final sacrifice. Leonard's blade light grew faint, and my consciousness slipped into darkness. In the last moment, I heard his voice, heartbreaking, "Elara, hold on." Should Elara have stopped chanting before the forbidden spell spiraled out of control, thus saving her own life? If it were you, facing the choice of a life for a life, would you choose to sacrifice yourself for your loved one, or search for another way to coexist? Rebirth from Ashes. Winter, 1279. The ruins of the royal city of Cast were silent in the snow, the broken stone walls like the skeleton of a giant beast, recounting yesterday's bloody battle. I, Elara, lay on the cold stone floor. The cost of the forbidden spell surged through me, consuming my life. My chest felt constricted by an invisible chain, every breath was like dancing on a blade's edge. Beside me, Leonard knelt, his armor shattered, his hands stained with blood, his gray-blue eyes burning with desperation and resolve. The altar's green light had faded, and Carlos's legion was reduced to ashes, but my body was like a withered leaf, ready to crumble at any moment. You cannot die. His voice was hoarse, commanding, yet laced with a rare tremble. He tore open his own wrist, letting the blood drip onto my lips, warm and sweet-smelling. Drink, Elara. His tone brooked no argument, as if he were fighting fate itself. I wanted to push him away, but my arms were limp as cotton. I could only let his blood slide down my throat, searing my soul. The power of the forbidden spell churned within me, like the last embers, igniting a fragile spark of life. I coughed, opening my eyes, seeing his pale face. Blood dripped from his wrist, staining my dress like a blooming rose. His fingers brushed my cheek, the warmth of his blood chasing away the ruin's chill. "You must live," he whispered, his voice like a knife thrust into my heart. "I cannot lose you again." I grabbed his hand, tears mixing with blood, blurring my vision. "Leonard," my voice was faint, like a candle in the wind. "You've paid too great a price for me." The cost of the forbidden spell made me understand that my life had traded for his, yet now, he was trying to bring me back with his own blood. This forbidden love, like a curse, entwined us, its weight making it difficult to breathe. Outside the ruins, the snow began to slow. The dawn rose over the horizon, its faint red glow cast upon the shattered sanctuary, like divine forgiveness, or perhaps fate's mockery. Carlos's legion had been consumed by the green light of the forbidden spell. His black robes were carried away by the wind, leaving only a pile of ashes. Isabella, the woman with the flowing blonde hair, was abandoned by the nobles and exiled to the border. Her jealousy, like a viper, had ultimately bitten only herself. "It's over," Leonard said in a low voice, helping me sit up. His arm wrapped around me, a warm fortress against the ruins' cold wind. I leaned against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. The scent of blood mixed with the lingering odor of incense, filling the air. The sconces had long since fallen, and the residual wax was hardened on the stone floor, like our shattered past. "Where do we go?" I whispered, my voice faint as a breath. The church's conspiracy was exposed, Carlos was gone, but the crown of caste remained a vast net, ready to trap us at any moment. "Away from here," he answered, his tone firm as iron. "A place without judgment, without gods." His fingers tightened on mine, the bloodstains mingled in our palms, like a final vow. I looked up, seeing the dawn light on his face, his sharp features carved by the light. His eyes softened for a moment, like the candlelight from our first meeting in the snow. "Do you regret it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Committing treason for me, forsaking everything?" He lowered his head, his forehead resting against mine, his breath hot, smelling of blood and iron. "If this world has no place for us," he whispered, his voice like thunder, shaking my soul, "then let it turn to ashes." My heart skipped a beat, and tears fell again. His words were like a sword, piercing my fear and confusion. I knew this love was forbidden, a curse, yet it was also my only salvation. The cold wind of the ruins blew past. The dawn light grew brighter, seemingly paving an unknown road for us. Suddenly, hoofbeats sounded in the distance, low and urgent. My body stiffened. Leonard swiftly rose, drawing the small knife at his waist, the blade shining in the morning light. "Hide," he growled, pushing me behind a remaining wall. I gripped his cloak, my voice trembling, "Don't go." He turned, a look of fierce resolve in his eyes. "I won't let you face danger again." His fingers briefly brushed my face, the warmth of his blood left on my skin like a final promise. The hoofbeats stopped. A figure appeared at the edge of the ruins, cloaked in black, a veil over their face. My heart sank. Was it the remains of the church? Or a new enemy? Leonard raised his knife to meet them, his back like a mountain, blocking the morning light. Hiding behind the broken wall, the weakness from the forbidden spell made it hard to stand. I clutched the parchment, the secrets of the forbidden spell now reduced to ashes. I knew our escape was not over. The shadow of caste still lingered. And would Leonard's blood buy us true freedom? In the dawn, his blade flashed like snow, piercing the silence of the ruins. And the black-robed figure slowly removed the veil, revealing a strange face, but with a familiar cunning glint in their eyes. Her voice was low, laced with a hint of a smile. "My Lord Duke, did you truly believe that ashes were the end? Should Alara and Leonard continue their escape to find a secluded place without judgment?" If it were you, facing an unknown new enemy and the lingering shadow of caste, would you choose to live anonymously, or face the challenge and uncover the truth?